Hey there, welcome to our kitchen. I'm going to share today with you how we prepare our fresh baked bread. I get asked almost every time we share it, how do you make it? Is it hard? Is it difficult? How much time does it take? So I figured what better way to help and show everybody but to create this video. Now, there's lots of ways to prepare bread. A lot of people get really high anxiety about making things, and they want to know the perfect way to do it. And I found that really there is no perfect way, and you might make it a little bit different each time, and everybody's going to have a little different technique, but bottom line is it's going to work and it's going to be great. As long as you get your ingredients pretty close and your cook times right, everything else is going to turn out just fine. So don't be nervous. If you don't have the same equipment I do, I'm going to give you tips and hints on how to circumvent that and teach you how to make great bread. So I use a method developed by a gentleman named Ken Forkish, and in his book it's called Flour, Water, Salt, Yeast. It's pretty simple. That's all it includes. Flour, I don't have my water, it's over there in the tap. I just use plain tap water. Salt and yeast. In this case I'm going to actually do a mixture because truthfully I've made it out of bread flour, I've made it out of all-purpose flour, I've thrown in some whole wheat. It all comes out great. Truthfully, whatever you have in the kitchen is going to work just fine. As far as equipment goes, the true secret to making great bread is the Dutch oven, and we'll get further into that as we go along. I have two because I make 2 loaves at a time. And then proofing baskets, these you can buy on eBay. They're, I can't remember how much, but $10 or $15 each. If you don't have a proofing basket, just use a proofing bowl. It'll work just fine. Basically, it's just to keep the bread in shape. Over here, we have a scale. Now, it is important to get your measurements right. And so I use grams. Everything's done in grams. Your measuring utensils here. A big bowl is very helpful, and a thermometer. Now, the thermometer is useful, but the water that we're going to get is about 95 degrees. So if it feels a little tepid to the skin, it's probably pretty close to 95 degrees. So you don't absolutely need a thermometer when you're making bread. Are they cheap, easy to get? Yes. But if you just want to jump in and do it right now, that's all you need. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is tar up my scale, get it set to 0, and make sure that we're on grams, and set my bowl on top of it. And then I'm going to do the same thing again. So we're at 0 again. I hope you can see that. Then I'm going to start adding flour. Now, I'm going to go up to 1,000 grams of flour. It makes it real simple, nice, easy, round number to work with. 1,000 grams of flour, and I just scoop it in. Sometimes I'll pour it in, but this is a big bag, so I'm scooping this time. And one thing I didn't mention about the yeast, any active dry yeast is going to work. We've used Fleischmann's, we've used this traditional active dry yeast. There are plenty of options out there, but you just want to make sure that it's fresh and that it's healthy. Yeast obviously is a living organism, so in order for it to do its job, it must be alive. So you want to get fresh yeast, and pretty much anything that's in your grocery store is going to work. So I'm at 1,000 grams roughly. I'm going to tar again because I'm now going to add, I'm going to do a half tablespoon of yeast, or a half teaspoon of yeast. And the reason I'm using a half is because I want to eat this bread tonight. So I'm going to add a half. If you plan on having the bread sit overnight and go through its bulk fermentation overnight, you really would want to use more like a quarter. And that gives a better flavor. The longer the yeast has to work, and the more proliferation and the more times it has to multiply, the better flavor that you're going to get out of your bread. It's going to be a little bit more complex, and I find it just tastes better. So that was roughly 2 grams of yeast. In Ken's book, he refers and he says that you should use 21 grams of salt. I found that for my personal taste to be way too salty. So I only use about 15 to 17, depending on the bread that I'm making. If it's a rosemary bread, I tend to go a little higher. And making a really good rosemary or garlic bread, all you have to do is during this stage that we're working on right now, go out in your garden, pick out some rosemary sprigs and throw them in. Same thing with garlic. So that's our dry ingredients. I'm at 16 grams of salt. The next thing to do is work on our water. That's a little bit more involved, so I'm going to take us over to the sink. Okay, so I'm going to turn my hot water on, and I can feel it right now. It's pretty close to 95, if not a little over. And we are close. What I'm going to do is I like to get just a glass to put it in. And again, if you're not exact on to 95, you're going to be just fine. Warm up the glass a little bit so we don't drop too much. You're going to be just fine, but as long as you get pretty close to 95, you'll be okay. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that our scale is set to 0, which it now is, and I'm going to add 720 grams of water. And like I said, this water is at about 95 degrees. It's important to keep it pretty close to that range because that's the temperature that the yeast prefer. Once it's all said and done, I forget what the target temperature is for your flour, water, yeast mixture once it's complete. But again, 95, that just seems to work out pretty well. So I have continued to use that for all of our batches. So once we write 720, stop pouring, get rid of this, and start mixing. I just use the bare hand. It's the best method. I'm going to speed this up a bit. Okay, so now we have our dough mixed. There's some techniques that you can use over the first 10 minutes to an hour. Ken recommends that you fold the dough over. The method that you use is you just grab it and you pull and you fold. We do this after, he suggests 10 minutes and then after 1 hour. And truthfully, I've done it both ways. Guess what? You're going to get great bread whether you do it or not. Alright, for this particular bread, we're going to let the dough rise for about 5 to 6 hours or until it's about doubled in size. But really that's up to you and your experimentation. Okay, fast forward about 6 hours and we're going to look at our dough. It's looking nice and tasty. It smells yeasty and very yummy. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to prep our surface. We're just going to put a little bit of flour out. This is just to keep it from sticking. Turn it upside down and it's going to flake and well, it kind of honeycombs inside all the nice little air pockets from the yeast activity. And basically what the yeast is doing is eating the sugars in the bread and converting that into delicious tasting bread. So now we're done with our bulk fermentation. We're going to prep it for a secondary or a proofing fermentation. And that's a much shorter duration, usually about 60 minutes to 90 minutes. Now to cut this in half, since we are making 2 loaves out of it, I'm just going to put some flour right down the middle of it, and that's going to allow my knife to pass through it nice and easy without getting stuck. And we're going to create 2 loaves, roughly the same size. We're going to put one off to the side and work with the other at the moment. Add a little bit more flour to our surface. We're just going to pull over this bottom. We're just going to fold it, keep folding until our ball starts tightening up. And once it starts tightening up, we're going to turn it over and we're going to go to a slightly unfloured surface. So I'm going to create some space. I'm working on a small space here, but you can use another portion of your counter. And then you're going to pull it, and you're going to feel it starting to tighten up. And you want it to kind of feel almost like a underinflated water balloon. And your loaf is ready. Now I'm going to move to a proofing basket. I've already put saran wrap in here. It just makes it so much easier to get it out. And the bottom of this bowl, or this loaf right now, is going to be our top when we flip it out of the basket. So we're just going to drop it in there. I'm going to add a little bit of flour all around to prevent sticking when we're ready to bake, and fold over the top. And we're going to let it sit for about 60 minutes or until you can push down and it springs back slowly. So I'm going to speed up the video a little bit for the second. When your bread has about 30 minutes left in the proof, you're going to want to start your oven, preheat it to 450 to 475. I find 475 gives you a really crispy outside crust and crumb. 450 keeps it a little less burnt. And then we're also going to put our Dutch oven inside. I leave the lid off because I just don't want to handle a hot lid. Now that the bread is proofed, we're ready to put it in the oven. You can test it by pressing down, and it should spring back to pretty much true to form in the place that you pressed. It should take about 2 or 3 seconds to do that. That tells you that our bread is ready to go into the oven. We're going to bring it out. Carefully, obviously your pan is going to be very hot. Just flip it over. Take off the wrapping and set it inside. We're going to put our lid on. And it goes back in the oven for 30 minutes. Alexa, set timer for 30 minutes.
30 minutes. Starting now.
Right after 30 minutes, we take the bread out and we're going to remove the lids, and we're going to cook for another 20 minutes. I'm also going to rotate the bread in the oven. All right, our 20-minute timer is up, so we're going to take the bread out of the oven and place it on our cooling towel. I just kind of dump it. It's nice and crispy looking. We got 2 loaves in here. And once we get it out, turn it over and let it sit for about 20 minutes before we slice into it and enjoy.